Hello, friends, comrades, and interested others. Today we're going to be talking about how to have better arguments on the internet. I'm going to start off by doing a short reading from Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Pablo Freire. If I do not love the world, if I do not love life, if I do not love people, I cannot engage into dialogue. Dialogue, as the encounter of those addressed to the common task of learning and acting, is broken if the parties, or one of them, lack humility. How can I dialogue if I always project ignorance onto others and never perceive my own? How can I dialogue if I regard myself as a case apart from others, mere its in whom I cannot recognize other eyes? As I'm sure is a shared experience with everyone watching this video, I've had some pretty frustrating experiences having arguments with people on the internet. The internet is kind of set up in a way that is intentionally counterintuitive, or at least effectively counterintuitive, to having productive arguments a lot of the time, because it gives people this distance and this anonymity and this kind of lack of consequences that you can just kind of say whatever crappy thing is like on your mind, and the other person who's receiving that message is not a real person. So we are kind of fighting an uphill battle when it comes to trying to have good faith conversations with strangers on the internet, but I still think it's worth the effort because, this is really the shape of what a lot of human interaction looks like these days. And I don't think it's really an option to opt out in engaging in that sphere of dialogue. So, as some of my friends know, I consider myself to be somebody who is particularly good at having arguments on the internet. Obviously, it doesn't always turn out well, but I've had like several instances where conversations have started out with someone just kind of like flatly insulting me or belittling me. And through the way that I engaged with them following that, we actually were able to reach a place of mutual understanding. And several times I've actually gotten an apology from that person, even if they just like came in being like literally just like calling me a slur or something like that. So, as I'm sure we're all familiar, conservatives online tend to engage in this style of like quote unquote debate. You see videos with titles like
"Conservative destroys leftist with facts and logic."
let's just like think about that for a second, what it means to destroy someone with facts and logic, or like intellectually destroy someone in general, because watching these videos I have never seen a leftist leave that kind of interaction convinced. What somebody means when they say they've destroyed someone with facts and logic is not, I engaged in a dialogue with this person and, critiqued their points and they conceded to me in that argument. Like, the person who is destroyed never leaves actually having changed their mind. What it actually means is I kind of just like intellectually or verbally battered this person until they got frustrated and left, and then I claimed a victory for myself. So that is not the kind of engagement that I want to like promote or talk about in this video. And I've even seen things like, to be honest, leftists kind of turning that around and being like, communist destroys conservative with facts and logic or something like that. And that's it's a style of argument that can have some benefit when you're not focused on convincing the other person and you're just focused on trying to like convince the audience or the implied audience of people who are witnessing this. But it's not, I personally would rather have arguments in which the person I'm talking to will actually reach a place of mutual understanding, and I tend to select the people that I engage with and how I engage based on that. So on the internet, there's essentially two different kinds of productive modes of political debate you can have. These two types are good faith dialogue, where you are both in a place or you've both reached a place where you are engaging in good faith and you are actually trying to understand each other. And then the other type is what I like to call playing for the fans, which is when you're engaging with someone who is not engaging with you in good faith and they're not reciprocating any attempt to understand you, but you continue to engage with them for the purpose of disproving this person's points to onlookers. So even if this person never concedes to you and never engages in good faith, you can have it in a way that it still winds up being convincing to the people who are not participating but are maybe reading it in your like Facebook thread or Reddit thread or something like that. But for the purpose of this video, I want to focus mostly on good faith dialogue and how to get people towards having a good faith dialogue. A lot of the time when people are engaging in arguments online, they're coming from a place that is very emotionally reactive, whether the person recognizes that that's what they're doing or not. They're usually trying to defend themselves against an attack or a perceived attack by another person, and we kind of have to like get over that initial reactive response in order to have a good faith conversation. And in order to have a good faith conversation, you also need to be able to kind of read who is capable of having that conversation and who is willing to have that conversation, at least in this situation. And that might not always be readily apparent because, like I said, I've had people come into my comment section just like full on being really sarcastic or demeaning. You'd probably assume that person is not willing to engage in good faith, or you couldn't get that person to a place where they would engage in good faith. And that's not always the case if you're willing to put in that time and patience. However, sometimes people are just trolling. And so when I get comments from people with names like actual Hitler, and the comment is just like an insult or threat, I don't pick that person to engage with. Like, there are people who are actual trolls. It's clear they're just kind of like going through the internet and like maybe they didn't even watch your video or they didn't even read your thread, and they're just like leaving these like one-off like haha like comments and moving on, and they're probably just doing that on a bunch of different things. Just don't engage with that person. I feel like the people that I can actually get to engage in good faith, even if they come in being kind of hostile, is people who leave comments that imply that they think that they're smarter than me. You know, if somebody comes in and they're just being kind of like condescending, then I feel like that's something that I can work with, because I can almost be like, oh, I see you are an intellectual, and if you are an intellectual, then I would like to have a discussion with you. And, you know, if you are an intellectual, then it would demonstrate your intellect to have a good faith conversation with me. And I kind of like will like pick apart the things that they say and will reply in good faith to criticisms that they make. And the trick to that is really, you know, being able to demonstrate humility and demonstrate good faith for the purpose of drawing that out of other people. And like sometimes it is really satisfying to just be like, you're a fucking idiot and I don't want to engage with you. And, you know, like if you get to a point of doing that, like that's fine, but just know that as soon as that's the direction that it goes in, where you're just kind of like mutually exchanging hostility, then good faith is off the table. And so if you're not trying to have a real conversation with someone, that's fine. But if you're trying to have a real conversation with someone, personally, I try to hold myself to a very high standard of good faith engagement. And so basically, if I am seeing a comment in which I can't engage with that person in good faith, or that person I know just cannot engage with me in good faith, then I just don't engage, because I'm like, I'm not here to just like be insulting people and raising my blood pressure. Like, I already have enough like stress and anxiety in my life to not just do some sort of like verbal tennis game with somebody on the internet. If I think that we can have a conversation and I think that we can reach a place of mutual understanding, then I will engage. But if I don't think that that is possible, and or if I reach a place in the conversation where I realize it's not possible, then I just stop engaging, because it's not worth the time and it's not what I'm trying to do. Another thing that I find really important is, especially if you are acting in allyship. So, you know, for example, I'm a white person, and like when I'm having conversations about racism with other white people, or if you're a cis person and you're having conversations about transphobia with another cis person, you really want to avoid getting like overly angry or overly self-righteous on other people's behalf, because regardless of your personal opinions, just like I as a white person have more in common sociopolitically with a racist white person than I do with a person of color. And so when I'm engaging with other white people, I don't want to position myself like, oh, ha ha ha, I am the good white person and I've done so much work and you are a racist and a bigot and an idiot. and I'm just going to like belittle you in order to like kind of raise my self-esteem on your back, and that's not a productive way to have a conversation, and it's not really warranted. Like, the role of allies is to educate other people in their same socio-political class. And so if I am engaging in arguments with other white people that are antagonistic or with the intent of belittling other people, then I'm not actually being a good ally, because I'm not actually focusing on what would benefit the oppressed group in question, which is changing people's minds and actually educating people. And so I have to be able to be humble in myself, and I have to acknowledge, the similarities between me and my opponent in that conversation, to be like performing a level of emotional labor that people of color can't be expected to perform. And so, yeah, you don't want to come into those arguments being like, I'm so angry that my aunt is racist, and just kind of like attacking her. Like, you need to come into those arguments, if you want them to be productive, be humble and be like, I understand, even, like where you got that information from or why you have that idea. And, this is something that I've had to unpack, and here are the resources, and here are the ideas, and here are, the thoughts or analysis that have helped me unpack that. So when you're having those conversations in allyship, you really want to be inviting people onto like an educational journey that you're also on, not positioning yourself as like the bestower of knowledge, or the bestower of right opinions onto other people. Like, you are both doing the work, you are just trying to like help them in on the work that you're doing as well, not like positioning yourself like, yeah, not positioning yourself like you don't have any work to do and you're like so much better than them. And I find, to be honest, like when I insist on engaging in good faith, then I reestablish the boundaries of what our conversation can look like. Like, once the person kind of gets the idea that I'm not just going to, call them like a conservative, racist bigot and this, that, and the other thing, and I actually am insisting on engaging in good faith, and even if they're hostile, I'm not going to reciprocate that hostility, it changes the shape of what the argument can look like, and people will start mirroring your behavior slowly more and more throughout your exchanges, because you have set the boundaries of how you're willing to engage. And you know what I mean? Like, if that doesn't happen, or like in situations where you're just being like trolled or ganged up on, like, it's okay to just like opt out. Like, you tried your best, it didn't work, like, you opt out. But I've never been in a situation in which I felt like belittling another person helped us reach a place of mutual understanding, which is again like what my priority is. I feel like a lot of the time on the left there can be this conflation between engagement and platforming, because I remember when I was a lot more actively engaged in the anti-fascist movement than I am now. Not that I don't believe in the anti-fascist movement, it's just I'm living in a location where that kind of work, that kind of direct action is not quite as relevant. But there was kind of this idea of like, no platform for fascists, which I get. Like, you don't invite people to speaking events, you don't let people have an audience, things like that. And I do agree with that principle, but then I feel like at points that gets misconstrued or like extended to the point where it's like even having a conversation with somebody is platforming, and that is something that we need to, that's like an idea that we need to dispense, because it is a conversation is not a platform. Like, if I am emailing back and forth with someone, or speaking to one person, or even like speaking to a small group of people that I disagree with, that is not a platform. We don't have an audience. Like, I'm not facilitating that person in any way. And so while I do think that it's important that we don't platform, racists and bigots and alt-right people, we do still, as allies, have to engage with them. And engagement and platforming are not the same thing. That being said, I'm also not saying like every alt-right chucklefuck like is in a position where he is able to engage in good faith and that that's a productive thing to do. But I'm saying that you want to kind of develop the ability to discern, why somebody is involved in a movement, where they're coming from with the points that they're making and the things that they're saying, and to discern, like, is this somebody who's actually just a completely brainwashed troll, Or is this somebody who, still has that curiosity and still has like a potential like teachableness to them, that you could engage with in a productive way? And that is something that I can't really put a word to. Like, it's hard for me to articulate in words how I make that distinction with people, but it's kind of just like a vibe. And like I've had conversations with alt-right people like at protests that I felt like have been productive. I've had conversations where like I've talked to like a right-wing protester who has left that conversation absolutely promising me they were going to read Peter Kropotkin. And maybe I've reached a place where I've realized that Peter Kropotkin is not the number one entry level text that I should recommend someone. But I still think it's helpful reading if you're somebody who's on the right wing. And the fact that I was able to, talk to this guy who was like holding up signs and holding up like racist flags and stuff like that, and leave that conversation with him being like, yeah, this is something I should at least read about or at least explore. Like, I feel like that was like a really big success on my part. And I feel like when I get to have those interactions with right wingers and have them leave that conversation at least kind of second guessing themselves, that's more productive for me than just like attending protests or holding signs. And so when I can sense that in somebody else, when I can sense that somebody is curious or is teachable, or is, to be honest, sometimes just coming at it from a place of arrogance, if I can kind of catch someone off guard and hold them to a higher standard of humanity than they're expecting me to hold them to, then I can kind of convince them that it is, intellectually beneficial to them to take me seriously, or it's intellectually beneficial to them to educate themselves about certain things. And even though those interactions may be 1 in 100 people, that's still like 1% is still a lot, and it's probably, to be honest, like more than 1 in 100 people that are willing to have that conversation. But the thing I want to take away from this portion is that it's important that you be humble and you engage with people not in some sort of condescending or superior way, but that you're curious and you hope that they are curious too. And people generally respond a lot better to that. Again, you're trying to reach mutual understanding, you're trying to engage in good faith, you're trying to, change somebody's heart and mind. You need to come at that with an energy that you are recognizing that person as human and you're actually challenging them to be more human. Now, the other form of internet argument that is possible to have with some productive value, but is not my favorite, but I still want to touch on it in this video, is what I like to call playing for the fans. And so this is a type of conversation where the other person is not engaging in good faith. They might be a troll, they might be somebody who's honestly totally brainwashed or does not see enough humanity in you to engage in good faith at all or place any value on what you're saying. But you're having this conversation in a format where this exchange is being viewed by other people, and you think that it might still be worth engaging just to kind of devalue this person's argument or disprove this person's argument in the eyes of other people, even if that person doesn't get convinced. And so when I am engaging in situations like this, I remember a conversation I had last year with a doctor in my neighborhood, actually, who was, arguing against BLM and was saying like a lot of just like really terrible anti-Black things. And then anytime, like I was doing a lot of intellectual labor, just kind of trying to explain things in every way that I could, and like pulling up arguments and articles and statistics and like finding all of these like citations and everything like that. And everything I put at him, he was just like, well, that's communist, well, that's liberal, well, that's like, he was a Trump supporter. He was full on just like, any media you can cite at me is like part of the communist cabal. And so because he wouldn't acknowledge the validity of any knowledge sources I could present to him, and he couldn't see my humanity either, there was no way for us to have a conversation in which we would reach a place of mutual understanding. But these conversations were also happening in pretty populated community Facebook groups where I knew that this person was basically taking on a platform in that they were expressing these ideas in groups that had like thousands of people. And so I still wanted to engage with him, and even though I knew he couldn't be convinced, I wanted to try to have that conversation in a way that at least other people wouldn't be listening to him or wouldn't be like respecting his viewpoints. And so in situations like that as well, even though it can be incredibly frustrating, it's also important to avoid, ad hominem kind of things or like making belittling comments, because when you belittle another person, it doesn't actually have the effect of belittling them. It actually just has the effect of making you look bad, or making you, kind of like devalue yourself. And so, the reason why I try to avoid insulting people or try to avoid making belittling comments isn't always because I don't feel like doing it, because a lot of the time I do feel like doing it, but it's actually out of respect for myself, that I know what it would mean for myself to be the kind of person that says those things or engages in those ways. And I feel like I have too much respect for myself and hold myself to too high of standards to have that be the way that I talk to people. And so when this is the kind of argument that you're having, obviously, yeah, it can be very frustrating. And the method that I recommend the most is what my friend referred to as a Socratic method. I honestly don't know anything about the Socratic method, so I don't know, like, there might be philosophy bros in my comments being like, that's not what the Socratic method is, but just like, engage in good faith. Um, but basically, what the method is in principle is that you focus on asking questions rather than answering questions. And this is honestly a method that the right uses against leftists a lot, where, we will be engaging in good faith and we will be like, oh yeah, here's all this information, let me explain it to you, like, here's what's going on, here's this, that, the other thing, here are like the citations to back everything up. And rather than engaging in anything, rather than reading anything or consuming any information, they just respond with question, 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 question. And eventually the leftist gets to the point where there's something that they don't know, and then it's just like, ha, gotcha. And then the argument's over. And it's really super annoying to engage on the other side of that. But when you're playing for the fans and you're just trying to invalidate someone's argument for the benefit of the group who's witnessing it, while also not raising your blood pressure, yeah, it's a lot easier to just like ask question, ask question, ask question, rather than trying to defend your point or present that person with information if you really feel like they're in a place where they're not receptive to information. And so some examples of these things might just be like questioning other people's sources. Like, they say Black Lives Matter is funded by George Soros. You kind of just say, where'd you hear that from? What's your source on that? And even if you have to present a piece of information, kind of present that piece of information and then quickly follow it up with a question. So you heard this opinion from Ezra Levant. Ezra Levant is in the pocket of major Canadian oil companies. So do you think that it's possible for a person who is being highly paid by a major development industry to be unbiased about the environmental impacts of that industry? And like things like that. Even if you have to present a small piece of information, do it for the purpose of further questioning. And then even if, that person doesn't wind up convinced, you've at least kind of managed to put that person on the defensive and to pick apart their argument and their logic in the eyes of the people who are witnessing it. Which, again, it's not my favorite thing to do, and it's not as productive in my mind as actual good faith conversation, but when it comes to a place where right-wing people are basically propagandizing themselves in online threads, I find that to be a good way to engage for the sake of challenging their platform, so they're not just like propagandizing to people who are listening to them uncritically, and just like providing that critical voice without burning yourself out. So that's pretty much all I had to say. I hope this video was helpful and informative. As always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, if you'd like to have a conversation, the comment section is open. I'd also like to apologize for this like weird effect, this like ghost effect that's been happening on this video. What happened is I spiderwebbed my phone screen and I can't afford to replace it, and the spiderweb goes right across my front-facing camera, and I film all my videos on my phone, and so it's just gonna be like this for a while until I can afford to replace my phone screen. If you liked this video or you liked other videos that I've made on this channel and want to support me in making this comment, you can leave a tip to my PayPal, which is linked in the description, or you can subscribe to my Patreon for any amount. Anybody who subscribes to my Patreon for even $1 a month gets access to a private Discord server where you can talk with me and other subscribers of the channel. There's also perks that involve getting into the end credits of my video and getting copies of zines that I've made. I have a new zine of poetry that's supposed to be coming out in the next couple of months, and so if you get that, then you'll get first copies of that zine when it comes out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.